The Humming membership platform is now being filled up with original stories. One of the genres there is what we call ritual stories. Stories intended to teach authentic Indo-European rituals and spiritual practice, while also inspiring and entertaining with new original stories. This is part 2 of the ritual story about Ausōsā and the celebration of the summer solstice, about when the life force is at its strongest. In addition to a great story, you will learn about purification, fire rituals, the horse sacrifice, and the ritual of the sacred drink, all taking place out on the vast steppes of our oldest Indo-European ancestors. Enjoy! When they returned, the camp was no longer quiet. The sun had lifted clear of the horizon, and with it the stillness of early morning had broken. Smoke rose in thin, steady lines from newly kindled fires. Voices carried across the circle of wagons, deeper now, measured and purposeful. The herds had been driven a little further out, their lowing more distant, as if even they were being kept apart from what was about to take place. At the centre of the encampment, the elders had already begun. Dreugos stood among them, sleeves bound back, his hands darkened with work. Near him, Klebio and Gorvos moved between vessels, broad-bellied containers of wood and hide, set carefully upon the ground. The scent of crushed sweetness hung in the air, thick and unmistakable. Honey. Not for eating, not today. For the drink. Ekwan was there as well, though he stood a little apart at first, watching as the older men worked. A heavy stone rested in his hands, and with it he pressed and broke apart the combs laid out before him, letting the thick gold spill into a waiting vessel. His movements were steady, but there was a tension in them, a restraint, as though he held something back. "Not too much at once," Dreugos said, without looking up. "It must be guided." Ekwan nodded, adjusting his pace. Around them, the others worked in quiet coordination. Water had already been drawn, clear but ordinary. Barley had been prepared, ground and soaked. A vessel of fresh milk stood nearby, covered, waiting its moment. All the parts were there, all but the most important. "They'll be back soon," Gorvos said, glancing toward the eastern edge of the camp. "They must be," Klebio replied. "We can't seal it without them." Dreugos finally straightened, wiping his hands slowly. "Not without what they bring," he said, "or it is only sweetness, not life." The drink they were preparing was no simple thing. It wasn't made to be consumed now, nor even in the coming days. What began this morning would sleep through the long turning of the year, deepening, changing, gathering strength in darkness. Only when the sun stood at its weakest, on the far side of its path, would it be brought forth again. Then, mixed with grain and milk, it would be shared. Not as sustenance alone, but as something more, a binding, a renewal, a taking in of what had been carried through the year. The elders spoke of it not often and never lightly. The honey drink, the sweetened life, that which held the strength of sun and earth together. But it couldn't begin without the morning's gathering, without the dew taken at the sun's rising when the skies still touched the earth, without the water drawn from the flowing vein of the land itself. Without these, the drink would remain incomplete, lacking the breath that gave it meaning. "They're coming," Wena's voice called, just at the edge of the camp. The men turned. Across the grass, the young women approached, their arms filled, their skin still carrying the faint brightness of dew and water. Danuvi walked at the front, the wooden bowl held steady in her hands. Within it, the gathered dew shimmered faintly, as if reluctant to lose the memory of the morning. At her side, another vessel, smaller but no less carefully held, carried water from the tributary, drawn in silence as they had been taught. For a moment, no one moved. Then Dreugos stepped forward. "Now," he said. Danuvi knelt first, setting the bowl between them. "This was taken before the sun rose fully," she said, "while the strength was still upon it." Wena and Heria followed, laying down the bundles of herbs and flowers beside it, their scents rising into the warming air. Ausōsā came last. For a heartbeat, her gaze met Equon's. No words passed. None were needed. Then she lowered her hands, placing what she carried among the rest. Dreugos gestured, and the others drew closer. Carefully, more carefully than they had handled anything else, the dew was lifted and poured. It vanished almost at once into the honeyed mass, but something in the air seemed to shift as it did, a subtle change, like the first breath before speech. Next came the river water, clear, slow-moving, drawn from the living current. As it touched the mixture, Dreugos spoke, not loudly, but with a weight that carried. "From sky to earth," he said. "And back again," Clébio answered. Equon stepped forward then, unbidden but not unwelcome. He took up the vessel and stirred, slow and steady, folding the elements together, sweetness, grain, milk waiting still, dew and river. His hands no longer held tension. Whatever had been restrained before now moved freely, guided by something deeper than instruction. Around him, the others watched, not as they would watch a task, but as they would witness a beginning. "It will sleep now," Gorwos said quietly. "And grow," Danuvi added. "Until the dark time," Wena said. "When we wake it again," Heria finished. The vessel was covered then, sealed not completely, but enough to hold what had been set within it. The honey drink had begun, not yet ready, not yet complete, but alive. And when the sun stood far from where it now climbed, when the days were short and the nights long, it would return, carrying within it the memory of this morning, of dew, of water, of light at its height, and of all that had been set in motion beneath it. The day didn't slow after the morning rites. If anything, it deepened. By the time the sun stood well above the horizon, the camp had shifted fully into motion. What had begun in quiet, dew gathered, water taken, their honey drink set to its long sleep, now unfolded into the visible labour of the day. Nothing was hurried, yet nothing was idle. Each task had its place, and each person seemed to find it without needing to be told. Ausōsā moved at the edge of it, no longer a child among the women, not yet fully counted among those who directed the work. It gave her a kind of freedom to see, to carry, to notice what others more fixed in their roles passed by. Her steps turned toward the ridge. It rose not far from the encampment, a long-backed swell of earth that caught the wind and the eye alike. From its crest one could see far across the grasslands of the steppe, the slow curve of land, the distant shimmer where heat already began to gather, the thin line of water that marked the river's path. Today it wasn't empty. Men moved along its slope, their figures dark against the brightening sky. They carried wood, armfuls of it, shoulder-borne lengths, branches stripped and sorted. No flame yet touched it, but the shape of what would come was already there. The great fire. Dreugos stood near the top, directing without raising his voice. Even from below, Ausōsā could see the way he gestured, placing, correcting, ensuring that each piece lay as it should. The wood wasn't piled at random. It was layered, ordered, given form. Air must pass through it. The fire must take evenly. It must rise, not collapse. Clébio worked beside him, setting thicker logs at the base, anchoring the structure. Gorvos moved back and forth along the slope, bringing what was needed, his steps steady despite the incline. Equon was there too. He carried longer pieces, placing them higher where the structure narrowed. For a moment he paused, looking out across the land as if measuring something beyond the work itself. Then he turned back, setting the wood in place with careful hands. Even from a distance, Ausōsā felt it, that same quiet pull from the morning, now stretched across the space between them. Below the ridge, along the path that wound upward, 3 smaller clearings had been marked. There, other men and youths were at work. These fires would be smaller, but no less important. Ausōsā had been told of them since she was young. She had watched them from afar in years past. Now she saw them taking shape, rings of cleared earth, stones set in rough circles, kindling laid but not yet lit. 3 places, 3 crossings. On the way to the great fire, each would be passed in turn. Each would be leapt over, the body carried through heat and smoke. The old burned away step by step before reaching the height. Purification, not once, but again and again. She stood for a while, watching. The sun climbed higher. The smell of cut wood and dry grass filled the air. Voices rose and fell, steady, unstrained. It all felt inevitable, as though the shape of the day had long been known, and they were only stepping into it. Then something shifted at the edge of her vision. Movement, not on the ridge, but beyond the outer ring of the camp. Ausōsā turned. At first she saw only dust, faint against the brightness. Then figures emerged, 2 men walking slowly, their pace measured, their attention fixed, not on where they were going, but on what moved between them. The mare. She knew her at once. Even at a distance, even after the passing of a full year, there was no mistaking the line of her neck, the way she held her head, the dark sheen of her coat under the sun. She moved calmly, neither resisting nor rushing, her steps sure, as if the path beneath her was already known. For a moment, everything else fell away. Ausōsā didn't see the ridge nor the fires, nor the movement of the camp. She saw only the mare, and in seeing her, she remembered. She had been smaller then, barefoot, unsteady, her hair unbound and wild. The mare had still been within the herd, not yet set apart. Ausōsā had followed her at a distance at first, then closer, drawn by something she could not have named. The mare had turned her head, watching, not shying, not threatening, simply seeing. "She will go free," her mother had said, standing behind her, "for a full year." "Why?" Ausōsā had asked. "So that she is not taken," her mother had answered. "So that she comes." And she had. Through the turning of the seasons, through heat and cold, through the long wanderings of the herds, the mare had moved beyond them and around them, never driven, never tethered, sometimes seen, sometimes not, always her own, until now. The men led her gently, not pulling, not forcing. A rope lay loose at her neck, more a guide than a restraint. She walked between them as if she had chosen it, as if she had always been walking toward this very moment. Ausōsā felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, not quite sorrow, but something deeper, more difficult to name. She'd always loved that mare, the way she moved, the way she seemed to belong to the land more than to the people who watched her. The way she couldn't be held, and yet had returned. "She came back," Heria's voice said softly beside her. Ausōsā hadn't heard her approach. "Yes," she answered. "They always do," Heria said, but her tone held a trace of something uncertain, as if she, too, felt the weight of it more strongly this year. Below, the mare stepped into the outer edge of the camp. People made space without being told. The movement slowed, shifted, acknowledging her passage. No one reached out, no one spoke loudly. Even the children watched in silence. Danui stood near one of the wagons, her gaze lowered as the mare passed. Wena watched more openly, her expression unreadable. "They say she must be strong," Heria continued, "unbroken and whole." "She is," Ausōsā said. On the ridge above, the work continued. Wood was laid upon wood. The great fire took shape without flame. Along the path, the smaller fires waited in their circles of stone, and below, at the heart of the camp, the mare who had walked freely for a year now stood once more among them. The day held all of it together, preparation and memory, anticipation and something like loss, the building of fire, the return of what would be given. Ausōsā stood between them, feeling the weight of both. By nightfall the flames would rise, and nothing that had been set in motion would remain unchanged. The day didn't pass so much as it held. By midday the sun stood high and unwavering, pouring its full weight down upon the land. The grass no longer shimmered with dew, but lay bright and open, every blade exposed. The air thickened, not with heat alone, but with something less easily named, an expectancy that pressed gently against her skin, that lingered in the pauses between words. People still moved, still worked, but more quietly now. Laughter came and went in shorter bursts, voices dropped sooner. Even the children, who earlier had run freely between the wagons, stayed closer to their mothers, as if sensing that this was no longer a time for noise. It was the height, and though nothing had yet happened, everything felt as if it already had. Ausōsā found herself drawn again to the outer edge of the camp. Not toward the ridge this time, but toward a place just beyond the wagons, where the ground dipped slightly and the grass grew thicker. There, A small space had been cleared, not for fire, but for something quieter. The mare stood within it. She had been washed. Her coat, already dark and smooth, now held a deeper sheen, catching the sun in soft, shifting lines as she moved. Water still clung in faint traces along her flanks. Her mane had been combed out, the strands falling long and even, no longer tangled by wind and wandering. She didn't strain against the rope that loosely guided her. She just stood. Two older women moved around her with slow, careful hands. One held a length of green, fresh-cut stems, still living, their leaves soft and bright. The other lifted the mare's mane, weaving the green through it, binding it in loose strands that lay against the dark hair like threads of summer itself. Not decoration, not merely. Ausōsā didn't step closer. She knew what she was seeing. The mare had come back whole, unbroken, untaken. And now she was being given back, not as she had been, but as something more. "She's ready now," someone said softly behind her. Ausōsā didn't turn. She didn't need to. The voice carried the same tone she'd heard in the elders that morning. Not sorrow, not pride, but something that held both without naming either. The green in the mare's mane shifted in the light. Life bound to life, given. A breeze passed over the grass, brief and warm. For a moment, Ausōsā felt again the touch of the morning, the dew on her skin, the water of the stream, the closeness of everything. But it had changed now. What had been open and rising had become something else, tighter and waiting. She turned back toward the camp. As she walked, she began to notice the others more clearly, not as a single movement, but in fragments. A group of older men seated in the shade of a wagon, speaking low, their gestures small and precise. Young women gathered near one of the fires, threading flowers into one another's hair, their hands lingering just slightly longer than needed. And the young men, they stood in looser groups, not working now, not as steadily. Some leaned against the wagons, others sat in the grass. Their voices were low, but not as controlled as the elders. There was a restlessness there, something held just beneath the surface. Ausōsā slowed as she passed near them, not looking directly, but listening. "He said it himself," one voice murmured. "You heard him?" another asked. "No, but it was told to my brother. He was there." A pause. Then, quieter still. "Tonight, at the fire." Ausōsā's steps didn't stop, but something in her sharpened. Another voice, more uncertain. "He hasn't bound it yet." "No," the first replied, "but he will." A faint sound, half a laugh, half disbelief. "He will lay it down then, if he speaks it." Ausōsā kept walking. She didn't turn, but the words settled into her, unfolding slowly, finding their space. Not bound, not yet, but he will. She didn't need the rest spoken. She had seen it before, in other years, though from a distance, as a child watching what she didn't yet understand. The unbound hair, the wolf fur still worn, the ones who stood apart, not yet returned. And then, on a night like this, the laying down, the binding, the step back into the circle. Her breath felt different now, fuller. She reached the shade of a wagon and paused there, her hand resting lightly against the wood. Across the open space of the camp, she could see him. Equon. He stood with the others, but not fully among them. His posture held that same quiet distance she had noticed before, not withdrawn, but not really settled. His hair fell loose, unbound. The marks of his time away still clung to him, not as something worn, but as something not yet set aside. He turned slightly, as if sensing something. For a moment, their eyes met. Nothing passed between them that could be named, and yet everything had already begun to move. The sun had shifted. It wasn't yet low, not yet near its setting, but the light had changed, almost imperceptibly. The shadows beneath the wagons had lengthened by a hand's breadth. The brightness had softened, just slightly. The height had passed. Somewhere a child laughed and was quickly hushed. The wind moved again through the grass, warmer now. And beneath it all, like something deep in the earth, the day held its breath.